I think the Fed will continue to raise interest rates to the extent that they can get away with it. I think the Fed is interested in the mythology, the narrative of fighting inflation. I think what the Fed needs to do from a policy perspective is get interest rates high enough that they can cut them if they need to. It's very difficult to effectively cut rates below zero. And I think that Powell is familiar with that. I think on balance, although I don't believe in the existence of the Fed, I think Powell is doing a reasonably good job with the constraints under which he operates. And I hope that there's enough economic strength that although it's against my own interest, I think it's in the country's interest to see interest rates higher. I think my belief is that the Fed will blink and turn it around. I think that if you get outside of my circle, if you get to more conventional Wall Street, and certainly if you get to conventional Main Street, they all have been trained over 40 years to believe that the Fed has their back. They tend to believe that even the political classes have their best interests at heart. I don't happen to agree with that. But I think that there's still a reasonable amount of confidence in the American financial system among the American people. My personal belief is that's somewhat misplaced, but you asked me a question about broad sentiment, not personal sentiment. I don't think it is probable that that happens. When I look at the challenges that confront the United States relative to the challenges that confront, as an example, the European Economic Community, or Britain ex-Europe, or Japan, or China, while our challenges are real, they seem to me somewhat less extreme than the challenges that are being faced in other places. The dollar is the prettiest mare at the slaughterhouse, relatively attractive rather than absolutely attractive. And I concur with that completely. I think the Fed serves the interests of the U.S. political class and the United States financial services community. The idea that the rest of the world is borrowed in dollars and is facing a situation where it's increasingly difficult for them to pay us back is not something that is of concern to the Fed as much as the U.S. election cycle is. The idea that either the Democrats or the Republicans would do a good thing for the country seems to me to be a thesis that's disproven by experience. I think there'll be a lot of sound around the midterm elections, but I don't see any substantive change in policy that would affect me. There may be certain issues where a Democratic-controlled Congress would react differently than a Republican Congress. But I don't see, as an example, that either party would stop manipulating interest rates, would allow a free market to come to money. The issues that are important to me, individual liberty, I don't see that in the offing with either party. The country is extremely partisan. And I think if you saw a Republican majority in Congress, that you would see a stock market rally. There's a lot of cash on the sidelines. And that cash believes that a Republican administration would be more business friendly. So as an example, if you're a share market investor, you might see at the very least a relief rally in the face of a Republican administration, not administration, but a Republican-controlled Congress. Bernanke had no interest in allowing the American people to make their own investment and credit decisions. Think about what a negative real interest rate is. What a negative real interest rate is a political policy that favors spenders over savers. You don't grow an economy by spending your seed corn, but that's what he encouraged them to do. And that made him extremely popular. The reason for that, of course, is that there are more spenders than savers in society. And if you're going to disadvantage the saving class to the advantage of the spending class, while it will be long-term deleterious to everybody, in the near term, it will be very popular among spenders. Because gold is in a bull market in every currency in the world except the US dollar. So investors around the world are having a very different experience with gold and a different relationship with gold. If you're a Chinese investor, if you're a Japanese investor, if you're a Swiss investor, if you're a European investor, a British investor, an Indian, and you're in gold, you're having a good time. If you're an Argentine and you see the value of your currency fall by 80% and you held gold, you are thanking your lucky stars that you held gold. Gold is an investment pariah for 23% of the world's GDP, which is to say Americans. And if Americans are unconcerned about the aggregate national debt, as they should be, if they're concerned about negative real interest rates, as they should be, if they're concerned about the plurality of government expenditures over government income, which they should be, then I think investors need to be attracted to gold and they need to be grateful that the price is low enough that it's affordable. We should be very worried. You and I talked about this a couple interviews ago. You take Germany as an example, and the Germans decide to rely in their energy future on solar. It's in the north. The sun doesn't shine. The weather's lousy. The idea that you run one of the largest energy economies in the world on an unreliable source of energy for political narrative says a lot about the way we as a species have been conditioned to act in the last 40 years. We have decided to impose narratives in the face of physics and mathematics. So what they're experiencing in Europe really is a return of reality. They, for political reasons, decided to rely on the Russians for natural gas, and then a geopolitical event happened. Germany decided to decommission its nuclear fleet, so now their green goals are blown to smithereens by burning coal. This is the triumph of reality over expectation. And we mustn't be complacent in North America either. We are blessed to have a better energy infrastructure in the United States. We're blessed to have a better grid in the United States. We're blessed to have ample resources of our own and access, in many cases, to Canadian resources. We are truly blessed, but we are still pursuing political policies that are not in our own best interest. And we need to recognize that as there are more people on Earth and as the living standards rise, that we're going to compete with more and more societies, not just Europe, for natural resources. People all the way around the world, Charlotte, want to live like you do, and that requires resources. And as these people get more money, they're going to be able to compete more. If the investor is willing to take risk, willing to be speculative, that investor needs to be in the uranium space. There's just no ifs, ands, or buts about it. This isn't a theme for 3 years from now. This is a theme for now. But it's speculative. There could be political challenges. There could be an accident in a nuclear power plant that would set that industry back 20 years. So things can go wrong. The probability is not just that things will go right. The probability is that things are going to go very right. And it's not going to happen 4 years from now. It's going to happen in 2023, I think. Investors, people who are interested in probabilistic high rates of return, internal rates of return, need to stick with oil and gas. The political class wants you and I to ride bicycles or use Teslas or something. In fact, about 550 of them flew private jets to Davos to tell us to drive less. This isn't tenable. My suspicion is that peak oil demand occurs about 2045. The political class, your prime minister, my president, wants to make oil and gas assets stranded assets in 2030. But they didn't talk to us. They didn't talk about what we want. They didn't talk about what energy bills we thought were appropriate. So I think investors need to stay in the oil and gas business. Investors who have a real sense of humor for political risk, might continue to stick with the coal business. As you know, I was a reasonable speculator in coal a couple of years ago, succeeded beyond my wildest dreams. I've sold half my position because I think it's so politically unpopular that now that it's popular among investors, I should take some money off the table. But I got to tell you, too, the subsidies that are available for people in wind and solar mean that the right class of investors need to look at those. Even if they aren't necessarily economically viable, they're very politically viable. And monetizing the stupidity of the electorate is a time-honored way to make money.